everyone. Hope you guys are having a great week. Wanted to share a few thoughts with you this afternoon here for your midweek discussions this week, and I hope that a few of these thoughts can help you guide your discussion, and that you guys can really be able to dig in, have some great conversations. So we talked on Sunday. We began our study of the book of Galatians and looking at two things in particular, and that is grace and truth. And even as we began to talk about those two things, it may be that you were reminded of a passage in John. I wanted to read that from John chapter 1 that talks about Jesus. And it says in verse 14, "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." You know, even as the Bible describes, as the Apostle John describes Jesus, the way he describes him as being full of grace and truth. And then as we look at Paul's letter to the Galatians, the two themes that jump out at us right away are the themes of grace and the theme of truth. And I think there's this interesting productive dynamic tension between those two concepts. Typically, we think of truth as being very fixed, being very finite, right, wrong, that sort of thing. And that's quite true. To have a truth standard means, well, this is the right way or the right thing to do. And then grace carries with it much more of a relational component. It's more of this idea of cutting each other some slack and really recognizing human frailty in one another and being gracious about that. And it's a very much more of a relational word. And so these two things, they're complementary of one another, actually. It may sound on the surface like they're counterintuitive, but the truth is they actually go together. And Jesus himself perfectly modeled, as the Son of God, perfectly modeled these two qualities in his life. You know, what did truth look like in Jesus? We talked on Sunday about the truth and about, the truth of the gospel. Well, what did that look like with Jesus? Well, I think about his integrity. I think about how Jesus spoke the truth in confrontation with people. He spoke the truth in his teachings. He lived what he spoke. In other words, he lived in a very unhypocritical way. There was truth about Jesus because not only did he say it, but he also lived it. And so in so doing, he really created for us, if you will, a standard of truth in the way that he lived his life. Even John, says that the expression that's an expression of God. I mean, he's the image of God. He is God. And so when we look at Jesus and the way truth is bared out in his life, we see a representation of God's character. Truth in at least one sense is a rather difficult thing, right? Because it's unyielding at some level. Truth cannot be changed. You can't change truth's mind. You can't persuade truth to be something other than what it is. Reality is reality, right? And I think sometimes, there are truths that are difficult to face. Sometimes the truth about ourselves, the truth perhaps of our own strengths or weaknesses, if you will, our successes and failures, opportunities and limitations. The truth about our limitations is sometimes tough to swallow. Trust me, the older I get, I have to accept more limitations, and that's not easy, right? I mean, this applies to us spiritually as well, though, as we face our own frailty and our own humanity, our own sinful nature. We have weaknesses, and sometimes it's difficult to really lean in and accept and see those truths. We have blind spots at times, which is why we need each other. There's truths about the world around us, and we can't always magically change that, but the truth is the truth. There's truth about God and Jesus and who they claim to be. I mean, there's all these different angles and things about the truth. Truth is a good thing because it does give solidity to reality, and it gives us solidity to our lives. Without truth, really we're just left to kind of make things up as we go along. And that's a very insecure place to live. It sounds nice on the surface. My truth is my truth, your truth is your truth, and let's just all kind of, be happy. But that does not make you happy, actually, because there's something inherent in us that understands that the truth must be more concrete and more solid than that. And we see that in Jesus. Now, at the same time, he's full of grace and truth. And so grace is the relational component. It's the part that opens up the door for forgiveness, for acceptance of one another in spite of our faults. It's the part that can soften the blow when we have to face hard truths or reality. And yet, as wonderful as grace is, it cannot stand by alone without the truth. And frankly, the opposite is also quite true. The truth without grace doesn't get us very far. And so you think about Jesus, and he's not necessarily, I wouldn't say that, it would be wrong to say that he balances grace and truth. Might be better to say that he embodies them both at the same time. And that's our goal as Christians, to embody grace and truth as we build relationships with each other and as we hold out the gospel to the world around us. And, as in Galatians, Paul's diving in on some very hard conversations and some difficult conflicts that are happening in the church. But the way to get through that is with grace and truth. A couple quick examples from Jesus' life. The example of the Samaritan woman at the well. We don't have time to read it. You guys might want to read that together in your small group tonight. But in John chapter 4, where Jesus talks to the Samaritan woman, we see how he points out her sins, quite frankly, maybe to the point that perhaps she might have been embarrassed, but he also does so with an air of graciousness and grace that actually led to her being inspired to go and share the gospel with her entire town. Jesus demonstrates this orientation toward a caring, loving relationship, yet at the same time was unafraid to speak the truth to this woman and insist that she deal with the realities of her life. I think if we can understand this balance of grace and truth, it will help us as we at times have to confront and talk to one another and take our relationships through difficult conversations and times. It also can help us as we reach out to the world around us and try to help others who perhaps don't know Jesus, demonstrate to them how to speak truth, but how to have grace and mix those two things together. The other example, it would be the cross. Grace and truth were both expressed on the cross. I mean, the truth is sin had to be paid for. Your sin, my sin, our sin had to be paid for. There was no getting around that truth. And yet, what Jesus did and the way he chose to address that was with an act of grace. And so we see in Jesus' life many times, there are many, many other examples, but these are two primary examples that I thought of that demonstrate for us this not balance, but this combination of in this tension between being gracious and being truthful. In conclusion, I just want to say, I think it's imperative that we express grace and truth in our relationships with each other. Sometimes that means recognizing the truth about ourselves and being open to what others might have to say to us about it. It's easy sometimes to kind of dismiss when people try to speak truth to us, but we need to consider these things and be open to it and looking for truth. It's not easy, or I should say, it is easy at times to hide from our own realities and hide behind platitudes and other, or even hide behind grace at some level. But we've got to have the strength to face the truths in our own lives. It also means at times helping other people face their truths and helping them deal with it. But to do that, we have to be gracious. And see, grace reminds us that we all are in the same boat. It reminds us that we all have the same condition, that we all need help, we all need love, we all need forgiveness. And sometimes we just need a break. And so, grace mixed with truth, I believe can have a profound impact on our relationships with each other. So here's here's a discussion, some discussion questions for you tonight. Feel free to add some more. I hope this conversation takes you to some great places. Here are a few questions that I thought of. The first one is, how do you understand the interplay between grace and truth? How do you understand this tension for yourself? How would you describe it in your words? Secondly, how can it be difficult for you to manage the tension between truth and grace? That's not always easy. I would say that most of us, if we're honest, would say, wow, there's at times I err on one side or the other. Just think about, your relationships or your marriage or your parenting. And I mean, there's a plethora of examples that we could think of, I'm sure, where it's difficult to manage that tension between grace and truth. And then the third question would be, how might a biblical perspective on grace and truth impact your view of relationships both in and outside the church? And so as you think about these things, I hope these questions can stir some great conversations. I hope you guys have a fantastic time tonight or this week, whenever you're going to be watching this with your small group. And look forward to being together on Sunday and continuing our journey through Galatians and talking about the new normal. Love you all.